Good.
All right, so I do apologize to you guys. I really did just delete it off my calendar. I couldn't figure out why it was on my calendar today, so I apologize. But, so we are going to, September CE was, again, mass casualty. And the one area that they really wanted to concentrate on was the pediatric jumpstart. They said that there's some changes as of March of this year. I went back and I took a look, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't see a whole lot of changes except for the way they did the diagram. All the triage information is still the same as it was in the past. So, we're going to kind of review it. There is no test today, which is good. And then the only thing we are going to kind of do as the test is I've got a couple patients we're going to practice triaging, and then we'll call it a day. So, let you guys get on your way. Illinois, a lot of different areas. You know, you've got big cities where you guys are at here where mass casualties can happen. You've got areas too, out in the middle of nowhere when you're down south. You've got small areas, you've got rough terrain that you can end up having mass casualties in. And so it's how you handle these and how you deal with them that's going to be one of the biggest things. We are going to focus a lot today on children. Just because of the fact that when we triage, we don't think about children a lot. And children also, they play a different role because we are supposed to keep all emotions out of our triage. We're supposed to take a look at things and say, okay, what's respirations? What's their mental status? What's their pulse? And a story, we give them a color. But pediatric, it's kind of like, God, maybe I could do a little bit more for that child. We don't want that child to die. And it's very hard to go ahead and take a child dead or expected for the most part. We do have a lot of children here in Illinois. Almost 3 million children under the age of 18 in Illinois. And of those 3,800,000 are less than, 3 years old, 5 years old. Okay. Why do we worry about children a lot? Well, because they're a little bit more vulnerable when it comes to mass casualty situations. They don't have the body structure to, flee from the scene. You know, you and I, we hear a big explosion, we turn away from it. Children will just sit there and look at it. And so they get hurt in a lot of different ways. So their physiological, anatomical, developmental difficulties can go ahead and cause problems for them. We'll start off with some of the things like respiratory. When you take a look at their airway is a little bit more narrow and a little bit more smaller than what an adult is. They use their diaphragm to go ahead and breathe. So any injuries to the abdominal area can cause problems with that. They also, because of their height stature, a lot of them, if they've got like heavy gases in the air, they're going to be susceptible to inhaling that versus what an adult would. Think about all the different types of equipment. With adults, you've got 7.0 to a 9.0 tube, so you've really only got 4 tubes. Peds, you are all the way down from a 2.0 all the way up to that 6.5. So with pediatric equipment, we need a lot of different sizes of equipment to manage these small little people. Respiratory rate's faster, their metabolism is faster. Their skin is a lot thinner, so they're able to absorb a lot of the gases or chemicals through their skin. Their immune system isn't as strong as what yours and mine is. You know, they are more susceptible to a lot of the diseases out there that what we have. They become hypothermic a lot easier too. As far as the body-wise, with trauma, because of their rib cage, their abdominal area their abdominal organs are not as protected. Most common injuries that you're going to see in children are liver and spleen injuries. They have a larger size head, so they're a little bit more top heavy than what? So they fall, they injure their head. When we're dealing with children in shock, children go ahead and they compensate very well. They're going along that pathway, and we think, oh, the vital signs are good, the respiratory rate's good, and all of a sudden they fall off that cliff and they crash, really without any warning. They have a lot less circulating blood volume. No one has a water bottle at all, do they? Or any type of bottle with them. I take a look and, this is, I think this is, you have a flask? Yeah, about this. This is about the amount of blood that a 3-year-old has. You can put into just the size of a water bottle. So there's not as much circulating blood volume. So even them losing 250 cc's can go ahead and send them into shocks very quickly. They don't understand things. Their ability to protect themselves is very low. You know, like I said, they may hear a blast and they'll sit there and they'll look at it. They'll stare at it, whereas we will turn away. We will try and run away to get away, and the child doesn't. They don't know to flee from that danger. So therefore, with them not fleeing, their risk of exposure is a lot higher. At what age can you get a child's history from them? What's going on? What age does a child know really what's going on with themselves? Yeah, it's pretty young. I mean, have you ever tried to ask a 3-year-old their health history? It doesn't work. If you ask a 3-year-old anything, what you're going to get is no most of the time. That's why with children, you never ask a child, can I do something? Because you're going to get the answer no. Tell them what you're going to do. Don't lie to them, because the minute you lie to a child, you've lost it with them. They won't trust you on anything. Don't tell them that that IV is going to feel like just a little poke, because you and I both know it hurts a lot more than that. You know, let them know it is going to hurt. Okay? They're not as cooperative either. You know, if you want them to do something, you've got to go ahead and earn their trust. You've got to get down to their level. You've got to make that eye contact with them. You know, before you go ahead and listen to their lung sounds, let them listen to their lung sounds if possible first with your stethoscope. We also have a lot of children, we call them high-tech kids, that are living at home. They're on, they have G-tubes, J-tubes, central lines, ventilators, just trying to think what else here. Shunts, okay? Different types of insulin pumps, different types of equipment that is there for their health. And so, how many of you guys would know what to do with a plugged G-tube? How many of you would know what to do if the G-tube came out? How are we going to handle those in the field? And for the most part, I mean, we do have something in our protocols that does talk about them and what to do with them, but initially it's kind of hard for us to remember. All right, so we have a Northwestern game here. Let's say that this area goes ahead and collapses, and you're on duty. I know this is Wrigley Field, they told me. Yeah, but let's pretend it's here in Evanston. So this area collapses. Most of these people here are going to self-extricate themselves to the hospital. Okay? They're going to take off and they're going to go. But you are going to have a great number of people that you're going to have to extricate. You're going to have to find. You know, it's going to be search and rescue or search and recovery after a while for these patients. What's your first concern here? What is your first concern? Yeah, is it even safe to enter there? Your safety comes first. Was it an explosion? Did something just collapse because of a weakened structure? If it's an explosion, is there a secondary device? Those are types of things that we need to go ahead and consider in a large situation like this. But just remember that most of your patients are going to go ahead and flee. It's about 80% of them that will go ahead and do so. Anything that taxes your resources, anytime you have more patients than what you do providers or rescuers, we consider this to be a mass casualty situation. And part of mass casualty situation is doing the triage, doing the greatest good for the most amount of people with the limited resources that you have available to yourselves. And this includes children. Remember, children, you have to follow the same plan that you do with adults. You know, I know it's really hard to say, okay, I'm going to let this child, because I open his airway and he starts breathing, and then I let it go and it stops. I think I've talked about this a couple times with you guys, but I don't remember how long ago. It's been quite a few years. But down in Texas, they had a 104-car pileup, and they went through and they started triaging. And there was a 16-year-old girl that they opened her airway, she'd start breathing. When they let it go, she stopped. They actually went ahead and tagged her expected or deceased. And they went about her way because they knew that they wouldn't be able to do anything for her. It wasn't until about 8-9 hours later when they were going ahead and removing bodies from the wreckage as they were going through, they found out that this girl was still alive. The 2 firefighters that actually have gone ahead and triaged her, one of them he retired. He says that's enough. He said he felt bad. The other one just quit the fire industry altogether because it was so traumatic for him to know that he left a 16-year-old child in a car to basically die. The 16-year-old, as last I knew, she was still alive, and she's living in a convalescent home. Has to have constant care. She's in a vegetative state. But, and it is very traumatic for you as the provider to triage some of these patients. Now, they have made some changes as far as terminology. They've always got to make changes somewhere. We're used to red, yellow, and green. Red is now being changed to immediate. Yellow is delayed, and green is minor. We are no longer using black for dead. We're using the term expected or deceased as our terminology. So, honestly, I think if you call an ECRN and tell her we've got 4 immediate patients, they probably wouldn't know what you're talking about unless you said you got 4 red patients. So, just so you know that the terminology is changing. And that's what you're going to see on a lot of documents coming out. It is very psychologically damaging to you guys to go ahead and take some of these children as expected or deceased, okay? We will have the new triage, which we can do a little bit more for peds than we do for adults, but just know that you've got to do what you have to do at that point in time. If you do have the extra rescuers, if you do have more people coming in to help, then maybe yes, you could do something. But to tie up all your resources on one child when there's other people that are going to need your help, you have to make sure that you're using your resources wisely. So the first thing, we always have to make sure the scene's safe, okay? Take a look. Is the structure safe to enter? Is there a secondary device? Is there any chemicals or hazmat? Is there a need for decon? Those are things that we're first of all going to start with. I heard you guys did a really good disaster drill this summer, I think it was, that you guys put together. They were talking about it at, some of the other departments were talking about it at a meeting we were at on Monday, and that how good of a job you guys did with it. Make sure that you're setting up your incident command, okay? Get that all put together. Set up your areas for triage, treatment, and transport, your staging areas. Everything needs to be in order. Communication is going to be the key in a mass casualty type situation. If you don't have good communication, the whole thing is going to basically fall apart. So, start triage. This is what we use for the adults. We've been using it since 2008 when the state of Illinois said that this is what we were going to go ahead and use. Here's the algorithm that you guys have. Basically, it's in your triage little start bags that you guys have. It's in your protocols, or in your mass casualty plan, I should say. So we start off when we get to a scene is anybody that can get up and walk away, move, they are tagged green. Even if they are, here's an extreme, they pick up their arm and they take it and they walk across the street, they are initially a green. We see a lot of children end up being green. Initially, if a situation happens, a mom is going to pick up her child and take that child with her across the street, even though that child may not be breathing or may be unconscious at the time. But that initial triage, a lot of times those children get triage green. It's not till we start our secondary triage that we find out that they're a different color. When we do start our secondary triage, we always start with the children to begin with. So our triage is very simple. If we look at a couple key things, we should do it within less than a minute's time. We look at respirations. Are they breathing or are they not breathing? If they are not breathing, okay, we can reposition the airway. We can try and open it up. Do they start breathing? Great. Then we go ahead and tag them the immediate or the red. If they don't start breathing after we open the airway, they get tagged at expectant. Okay? And then we move on. All right, it's very black and white as far as how we triage patients. There's really no variance unless you by chance have the extra people available. Now, if a patient is breathing, we're going to take a look at the respiratory rate. Are they breathing less than 30 times a minute or are they breathing over 30 times? If they're breathing over 30 times a minute, they're going to get a red tag. If they're breathing under 30 times a minute, then the next thing we're going to look at is their perfusion. Do they have a radial pulse or not? If the radial pulse is absent, we look at cap refill. We're going to look for perfusion here. Is it over 2 seconds? If it is, and the bleeding is controlled, we're going to take them as a red. What if the bleeding isn't controlled? Well, there's a couple things we can do. We can use bystanders. We could have someone who's next to them. They're able to follow directions, put pressure on it while we move on. We can throw a tourniquet on them. Even if the patient themselves is alert, we can have them try and control their own bleeding. If their pulse is absent and the cap refill is less than 2 seconds, we're going to check mental status. Are they able to follow simple commands? Okay, do they understand what you're talking about? If they do, they're going to get the delayed or yellow tag. If they can't, they're going to get that red tag. Now, a lot of people will say, well, this patient is not following my commands. I told them to stay here. They keep trying to get up and go back into the house or go back in. Sometimes in those situations, you can go ahead and tag them a red if they are not following your commands. Now, if they do have a radial pulse, then we're just going to go straight to our mental status. Are they able to follow commands? Then they get the yellow. If they're not, they get the red. We've been doing this START triage for so many years now, and it's pretty straightforward, like I said. Pretty black and white. You follow it. Doesn't matter what their injuries are at the time, okay? They can be impaled and have something coming out of their abdomen, but still at this time have a respiratory rate less than 30. Maybe they still have a radial pulse at this time. You go based on the vital signs that you see here. Now, our Jump Start, this is what we use for children. And Jump Start is a little bit different than the adult, okay? As far as when we get to the airway, it's where we see a lot of the changes. What's a pediatric patient though? What age per region 10? 16. Okay, so I've seen some 16-year-old boys that are a lot taller than me, weigh a lot more than me. Are we still going to treat that 16-year-old or 15-year-old as a child? You guys have to make the determination whether you're going to treat them as a child or you're going to treat them like an adult. American Heart says that a pediatric patient is anybody who has chest hair or breast development. Okay, are you going to start going and checking that? I mean, some of these, very small girls that, they're growing up a lot sooner, I guess, and they might be considered a pediatric. At age 9 and 10, they're already starting breast development. That 14, 15-year-old boy may not have chest hair or underarm hair. So it's really going to be up to you to make the determination if you're going to use START or if you're going to use Jump Start for these children. Some of the differences, well, the biggest one is the airway. In START, we reposition the airway. And if the patient starts breathing, we take them red. If they don't, they're expectant. With pediatrics, though, we're able to go ahead and not only reposition the airway, but if they're not breathing and they have a pulse, we'll go ahead and be able to give some rescue breaths to them. The difference between START and Jump Start with perfusion. We use the peripheral pulse or radial pulse for START, but in Jump Start we're only going to use the peripheral pulses, okay? And then mental status, can they follow commands for START? Jump Start, we're using the app. Are they alert? Are they alert to verbal, painful stimuli, or are they unresponsive? Now I'm going to just stay on this screen, and the next 15 screens, they actually break it down, but this is going to be, it's just a lot easier to stay here. So with our pediatric patients, can they get up and walk? Did they go with their mom or dad over to a certain area? They get tagged that initial green. If you look up here in the blue section, though, it says that in secondary triage, the infants, the children, they get triaged first. Now, are they breathing? Either yes or no. If they're not breathing, then a child will reposition the airway. If they start breathing on their own, they're going to be tagged that red or immediate. If they're not breathing, our second step is to check a pulse. Do they have a pulse? If they don't, they get the expectant tag. If they do have a pulse, but they're not breathing, we can give them 5 rescue breaths. Then we ask, are they breathing? Did that help? If it didn't, they get take the expectant. If it did start their breathing again, we'll take them as a red. Okay, so a couple more steps compared to the START triage here. Then the next thing, if they are breathing on their own, we're going to take a look at respiratory rate. Are they less than 15 or greater than 45? If they're not in that nice little area of 15 to 45, then we're going to take them as an immediate or a red. But if they are, they're falling in that nice little area, we're going to check to see if they have a pulse. Remember, our smaller infants will check the brachial pulse, not the radial pulse. Okay? If they do not have a pulse, they get tagged immediate. If they do have a pulse, our next thing is to check the ABPU. Are they alert? Are they alert to pain? Are they alert to verbal? If so, they're going to be tagged the delayed or the yellow. If they're unresponsive and they have a pulse, but they're breathing normally, they will also get a red at that point in time. Okay? So this has not changed, just the format as far as the way they put it together has actually changed. Anybody have any questions on the pediatric jumpstart? All right, well you guys, every single one of your ambulances should have the small START triage packs themselves. Nice little fanny pack, pretty fashionable, that you can put on your belts, and you guys can go on your way. Each command center that you have should have the command pack here. It actually has more triage tags. It's got the mass casualty plan. It's got all the forms that you need to send to the hospital. Okay. Yeah, even a dry erase board's in there for helping make the determination of how you're setting everything up. Now with our triage tags, initially we're just picking a color. That's all it is. And then you can go ahead and put them back into those plastic folders. The biggest thing I've ever heard people, I've never used these myself, but I've heard people say that putting them back into the packets sometimes can be rather challenging on scene. Taking these with children who are alert, sometimes they don't particularly like the color that they have. We've had situations where the children have actually changed their own colors to something else. I know that some fire departments too, initially, they've gone to using the little wristbands like what you would get if you were going into like a beer garden or something like that. They bought those colored wristbands and they'll use those and not even use these until they get to their secondary triage. Now, in this, when you get to the secondary triage in the treatment area, there's information that you can actually fill out. The more information that you can get on these tags when you're in that treatment and triage areas, the better off the patient. If you can get any past medical history, name, address, phone number. I think even on some of ours here too, the important thing is that it actually has the insurance number on it. All of these tags will all have a barcode, just like this, and it'll be on each one of the colors too. So that, I think there's some people in our Region 10 that do have the scanners, that they can go ahead and scan those barcodes as they're putting in the information. On the second pages here of the triage, this is what you're going to use for your secondary triage, this one right here. Again, when you're doing secondary triage, again, it's pretty black and white. You're going to do the Glasgow Coma Scale. Once you figure out what that is, you'll put that in this top box. If it's 13 to 15, you'll give it a score of 4. Then you're going to check the respiratory rate. Based on what the respiratory rate is, they get another score. And then the final one is, what is their systolic blood pressure? And then you get another score. Once you add up these 3 scores here, it'll give you a number, maybe like 10, and it'll tell you exactly what color the patient should be triaged on that secondary triage. And yeah, colors change. You may start off with someone as a yellow in that initial triage, but by the time they're at treatment and secondary triage, you may have to bump them up to a red. Or that patient may actually go down to a green. You know, it really depends. in a lot of these situations, in large mass casualties, these patients are not going to go ahead and be out of there within even a half hour a lot of times. Sometimes it can be hours before these patients get transported. There is an area in there too where you can start putting down all the vital signs and the times that you actually took those vital signs. An area for any treatment that you may have done. You can also note where all the injuries are and describe any other injuries. Now, does anybody know what this blue corner on the triage tags stands for or what it does? Can you pull out one of those triage tags for me for a second?
Now you're talking about they changed the, are we gonna get new forms that have different?
Well, the language is basically the same.
We're gonna get one that are exactly the same.
Probably not until they finish the mass casualty plan sometime this next year. But at that point, they will. I'm going to have you a triage for a second.
Here, do we have Jumpstart?
Yeah, I don't know, I'm looking, I'm trying to look up the,
Yes, we don't have,
fees on here right now.
What do you mean you don't have Jumpstart?
we don't have pediatric.
Actual tags.
The tags are here. You should have Jumpstart on those tags that you pulled out.
On the tags.
So it was a separate system.
Yeah, there's Jumpstart right in there for you. So the only thing is, it's exactly, the triage is exactly the same except for that the arrows go a little bit different, but it's still the same vital signs, the same information for it. Now, on these triage tags, how many of you guys know what this blue tag is for up here? I actually didn't know until just recently, but say for example, you have a mother and you tagged her as yellow, and her child is laying next to her, and her child may have been deceased, or even her husband for that matter. It really doesn't matter. You can actually, instead of going ahead and tagging them as a black or expectant, you can go ahead and fold over the blue, and that is to indicate that this patient is expectant or deceased, one of the two. Maybe you don't want to put our nice big tags that have big bold letters that say dead on them right next to someone's family member, okay? Yeah, a little cold. So just go ahead, use the red, but when you guys see this blue here, know that it is expected. The other thing I'm going to tell you, when you're putting these back in, make sure that the blue stays folded over. Because when you put them in, sometimes they'll go ahead and go back to the red, and the last thing you want to do is go ahead and try and use resources on someone you've already taken dead. So make sure that that tag stays over. You might even want to go ahead and consider putting it in upside down so it doesn't have a chance to even flip over at that point. So it's kind of like that instead. Yeah, and so far with this, what's that? Yeah, so there's, the other things on these tags that you're going to need to know is this flap. And I can throw this one around or pass this one around to you, but there's this flap that kind of comes off of this. Before you transport the patient, this has to be taken off and given to your transportation officer. Okay? Make sure it's filled out, what color you're transporting, where you're transporting to, any other information that you can put on there. This will be given to the transportation officer so that he can make sure and have a good count of how many patients have been sent where. But the other big thing is for patient tracking later on. There's a barcode on this end, and this barcode does match up with the tag itself. So if I send a patient to Evanston Hospital, I give this to the transportation officer, this tag goes with the patient to Evanston. Later on, when we're trying to reconcile the end of the mass casualty to say, Evanston, here's all your patients, they went here, and that way you can get some patient information so that you guys can bill or write up other reports later on as far as how many patients you ended up transporting, okay? But just make sure this gets torn off, don't leave with it, and give it to your transportation officer. So this is what's in your triage bag right now, the adult, and they went ahead and changed the algorithm. It looks a lot cleaner, looks a lot nicer. They are identical. They are working on the mass casualty plan right now, again. So hopefully we'll have some more information as far as when it comes out here after the first of the year, they can make some new tags. Does anybody have any questions on triage? You know, in reality, I mean, it sounds pretty harsh when we say it's pretty black and white. If the child doesn't meet the criteria, the adult doesn't, you tag them as expectant or deceased. We've been fortunate, I think, in this area that we have not had such a large mass casualty that all of our resources are so extended. You know, you guys, for the most part, can have a lot of help in a very short amount of time. I mean, it's not going to happen in 10, 15 minutes, but usually within an hour or something, you can have a lot of rescuers there to help with the transports. One thing too, don't forget about your private ambulance providers. A lot of them can drop a lot of ambulances on you very quickly. They have an organization, two of them, one's called Peppers, one's called Chugs, that if you enact that, it will bring a larger number of ambulances to your facility. When the plane hit the Cancer Treatment Center up in Zion, I think it was 2005, 2006, Superior Ambulance was able to drop about 50 ambulances on them within an hour. And they had to go ahead and move a lot of patients, so it was very helpful. So if you need a lot of ambulances to do some transports, you know, don't forget about your privates. All right, so our mass casualty plan. It was revised in 2013. The people that are working on the plan have heard your comments, and they're working on revising it again so that it's a little bit more user-friendly. I think one of the biggest things we hear most of the time, and I have nothing to do with this plan at all, but one of the comments that I take back that you guys see a lot of times is, in a small, we talk about a level 1, a level 2, or level 3. Instead of going ahead and using red, yellow, and green, why can't we just use standard terminology throughout the whole entire plan? So I think that's one of the areas that they're looking at. Now, our business as usual is just what happens on a daily basis. You have a car accident, you have 4 patients. How do you go ahead and handle it? Are you able to take all 4 patients with you, with your company here? Or do you have to have mutual aid come in? Do you have to have maybe Skokie, or depending on where you are, Chicago, come and assist in your transports? And that's business as usual, because that's kind of what you do on a regular day-to-day basis. Now, in a business as usual, you don't have to do anything different. You don't have to write an incident action plan. That's not required. You're not going to use triage tags. You know, it's just what you do on a regular basis. Where we start to see some changes is when we go up to the small scale. Now, I'm just going to look right over to this one here to start with. Our small-scale incident talks about the number of ambulances. If we're going to transport with 3 to 6 ambulances. Now, this is one area personally myself I have kind of an issue with, because how many patients can you put in an ambulance? 2. What if I have 4 green patients and it's a mass casualty?
Yeah.
If you're short, why not put 3 or 4? It comes back to not only your resources, but what about the hospital's resources? If you go ahead and you have 3 ambulances and you've taken maybe 10 patients into that one hospital, that's going to go ahead and extend or tax the resources of the hospital also. So it's not just about what you guys are doing in the field. You also have to kind of pay attention to Where am I taking these patients? How many patients can each one of these hospitals go ahead and handle? And even though it's a small scale incident and you're only using 3 ambulances, 10 patients all at once would overwhelm an ER, even if they are green, okay? So I think that's one of the areas too that they're kind of looking at. So in a small scale incident, we're talking 3 to 6 ambulances. You are going to contact the closest hospital to your incident, okay? So if you're closer to Evanston, you'll contact them. If you're closer to St. Francis, you contact St. Francis. It's always a good idea to give them a heads up before you get there. If you know you're going on from dispatch information, hey, we have a 5-car pileup, we look like we have multiple patients. There is nothing wrong with, while you're on the way there, hey, St. Francis, we are en route, we're gonna, large car accident, we may have up to 10 patients, just to give them a heads up. You don't have to give them any other information. Or maybe even when you pull up on scene, you can give them a holler and say, hey, we're on scene, it looks like we have a lot of patients, we'll contact you back with further information. So the first ambulance, when they get there, one is going to be calling for extra resources. The other person is going to start the triaging process. Okay. In a small scale incident, we don't use red, yellow, or green. We use categories, category 1, category 2, and category 3, based on vital signs and injuries. When we're calling in our rating report, if you've called in and you told the hospital that you have a small scale incident and you're transporting a patient, let them know. That way they won't divert you if you are transporting from that incident, because they've already said that they already know they're getting those patients. We're not going to use triage tags in this situation because there's just too few patients at this point. And you are going to do patient care reports for each one of the patients that you do transport. So in order to go ahead and categorize our patients, we start with our category 1s. This is based off of vital signs. Does my patient have a systolic blood pressure less than 90 2 times? Do they have specific injuries, flailed chest, depressed skull fracture, 2 long bone, proximal long bone injuries, unstable pelvis, amputations, penetrating injuries to the head, neck, torso? Those are the types of injuries that we're looking for. Or we can look at the respiratory rate, less than 10 or greater than 30. Glasgow Coma Scale, with blunt force trauma to the head, is their Glasgow Coma Scale less than 13? Any one of those patients we categorize as a category 1. They go to the highest level trauma center within 25 minutes. Now for you guys got 2 level 1s right in your backyard. Just remember, highest level trauma center within 25 minutes because that's usually the test question, okay? Category 2 patients, strictly based off of mechanism of injury, bless you. Was my patient ejected? Is there a death in the same patient compartment? Let's see, auto versus pedestrian. Now, I will tell you that this is all being updated, the trauma criteria with the new CDC national guidelines here. As we're rewriting the protocol book, we're updating this also based on the CDC recommendations. These patients here are going to be transported to the closest trauma center. One thing, do not forget about patients who are on anticoagulants, okay? And that's our Pradaxa, Eliquis, Xarelto, and Coumadin. Yes. Forgot the easy one. So if you have one of those patients that has an injury based on mechanism of injury, they're going to be a category 2. So if you're closer to Evanston, you go there. If you're closer to St. Francis, you go to that hospital. And then finally, we have our category 3 trauma patients. This is simple trauma. The kid fell down and broke his leg, or has an ankle injury, wrist injury, some type. They can go to the closest hospital at that point. Now, we do have some other little guidelines that we take a look at. Our traumatic arrest patients. Traumatic arrest patients will go to the closest trauma center, okay? Patients with no airway can go to the closest comprehensive ED. We want to get an airway on those patients, then they'll stabilize them, then they'll ship them out, okay? But For the most part, we should be able to get an airway on most patients. If we can't intubate them, we've got our king. If we don't have a king, we can always try our quick drape. Anybody, you guys do a really good job of categorizing the trauma patients to begin with, so. All right. So our next two sizes are medium and large scale incidences. Now, medium scale is 7 to 10 ambulances. Large scale is any more than 10 ambulances. Here, we're going to contact the resource hospital. So your resource hospital is St. Francis. So if you have a medium or large scale, the first call you're going to make is to St. Francis to let them know. Again, that heads up is really a nice thing. They can start making phone calls if they know about it early. And then when you make your secondary phone call to them, give a description of all the events. We are going to use our triage tags for our medium and large scale incidents. And then you want to let the hospitals know how many you have of each. Even before you know how many you're going to have, you know, you can give them a general idea so that the hospital can go ahead and start making phone calls. St. Francis can call Evanston, they can call Skokie, they can call, you know, the other area hospitals to say, how many reds, yellows, and greens can you take? That way, when the transportation officer gives a call back or incident commander gives a call back, they'll know exactly where to send each one of these patients to. Now, in a large-scale incident, and even maybe in the small-scale incident, your resource hospital may be overwhelmed. Maybe most of those patients extricated themselves over to St. Francis. Maybe it's super busy in there, they're having a hard time answering the radio. They may at that time go ahead and defer all communications to our pod hospital or to our RHCC, which is our regional hospital, and that's Highland Park. Highland Park then can take over all communications. If they do that, obviously they're going to let your incident commander know so that everybody knows who to communicate through. We'll use start and jump start for our medium and large scale incidences. One thing here though, when you are transporting these patients, you do not have to call the hospital to let them know you're coming. That hospital already knows that they're getting 1 red, 4 yellows, and 10 greens. So they'll just go ahead and go. The only time I may contact them is if something really changes. They're not going to divert you to another hospital. They're going to let you still come, but it might give them a heads up that they're getting something a little bit worse than what they already thought they were. Now, in a medium scale, we're going to do a written report. The reason why is because a lot of times you're not going back out to the scene to bring another patient in. Most of the time, you're only going to be writing 1 or 2 reports. In a large-scale incident, though, your triage tags are going to be your patient care reports. So again, it's really important to get as much information as you can when you're in that treatment and triage, secondary triage area on that tag. Anybody have any questions on the small scale, medium, or large? Now, if I remember correctly, we had an incident this summer, and I think it was during the disaster drill. The hospital asked you, what's your closest hospitals to the incident? We have a little bit of difference of opinion. I've always taught you guys, and I've taught a lot of people, that it's up to the hospital to start calling the area hospitals. It's not for you to say, well, I need you to call Glenbrook, and I need you to call Skokie. That's not, you guys have too much else going on at the scene to worry about which hospitals the resource hospital is going to be calling. So as far as I'm concerned, you know, when you call in an incident, the hospital should be calling all the area hospitals, not you guys telling the hospitals where to go ahead and call. You know, if they do ask you where are you located, because they may not know, or what's other hospitals that are right now close to you, that's fine. But you don't have to tell them which hospitals to call. The last part of the plan is the evacuation of the healthcare facility. Here we do things a little bit different. Now, each nursing home, care facility, hospital should have their own already evacuation plan in place. What are they going to do with all these patients? Depending on what the situation is, they're probably going to have a lot of walking wounded or patients that are not injured that don't need to go to the hospital. We use what we call reverse triage here in this situation. So basically, when you go in, if you're the one that's going in to get patients, you're going to take all the ones that can get out on their own. The ones that need very little resources to extricate themselves from the building. If you go back in a second time, the next ones you're going to take are the ones that maybe are in walkers or wheelchairs. They need a little bit more assistance to get themselves out. And then finally we go back in for what we consider our red patients, the ones that are bedbound, the ones that are morbidly obese, the ones that can't extricate themselves on their own, but that also need multiple resources in order to get them out of the facility. Once everybody is out, we're still going to go ahead and transport them. Reds go first, yellows, then greens. But it's just getting them out of the facility to start with. Again, no contact between the hospital and the transporting ambulances. You can use your triage tags here, and your triage tags are your patient care reports. All right, anybody have any questions on the plan itself? So it's Friday afternoon in September. A bus stalls on the tracks and it's hit by a passenger train. You are the first responder. You find 30 plus kids. Some are still in the bus and the train, and others are lying on the road. So based on this, you pull up, you see this. What size incident would you suspect this would be? Okay, a large scale incident, yes. What hospital are you calling in a large scale incident? Yep, your resource hospital, okay. Do you have to complete patient care reports in this situation? Nope. We're documenting everything on a triage plan. So here we have a 10-year-old female. She's got an open femur fracture. She's breathing 10 times a minute. Good distal pulses, groans to verbal stimuli. What color is she being triaged?
Immediate.
Medium?
Immediate.
Priority 1.
Okay, so we have a respiratory rate that's less than 15. So she gets tagged what right off the bat? Red, yeah.
It says under 30.
What?
Over 30 or less than 10.
For your children, you're looking at start or are you looking at jump start? Yeah, you're looking at start. Yeah, for jump start, it's less than 15 or greater than 45. Okay, then we have a 9-year-old male, respiratory rate 0. Faint pulses, unresponsive, lying outside the bus in debris. What's the first thing we want to do with this 9-year-old? All right, you open the airway and the patient starts breathing on their own. Red, yeah. Here we have a 50-year-old female, respiratory rates 20, cap refills less than 2, obeys command, dizzy and unable to walk. Yellow.
Dizzy feet.
Doesn't say she's blonde. All right, 10-year-old. Respiratory rates 22. We got good distal pulses. The patient's up, walking around.
Beat it.
Beat it?
Get moving, kid. Let's go.
All right, look at the three. Then we have a 9-year-old female. Respiratory rates 12. Distal pulses are absence, groans, painful stimuli, lying in a ditch 15 feet away. Red, yeah. Right off the bat, we see the respiratory rates less than 15, so we can take her red right away. And then we have a 10-year-old male, respiratory rates 26, distal pulses are present, obeys commands. He's unable to move his legs because he's in a wheelchair. Green. Yeah, if you give him his wheelchair, can he get out? Yep. So here we have a high-rise. There's smoke on 16th and 17th floor. Daycare is located on the 17th floor with 30 kids and 6 employees. Most have self-evacuated, but there is 6 children and 3 staff members that need assistance that couldn't get out. what size do we have here? Medium, yep. In a medium scale incident, what hospital are you calling? Resource hospital? Do you have to do patient care reports with this one, or can you use the triage takes?
Yes.
Yeah, you have to do patient care reports. So we have a 4-year-old female, respiratory rates 38, pulse is present, knows the name, recalls the incident, has facial burns, and is coughing. What is my initial triage? Initial is yellow, is green, because she can get up and walk away. We don't, remember in that initial, we're not looking at the injuries. Yeah, pretty soon she's going to be red. 53-year-old female, respiratory rates 48, CAP refills greater than 2, moaning, burns to the abdomen, and wheezing. Yes, red because the respiratory rate's greater than 30.
Go with the 4-year-old.
Respiratory rates. Here we have a 3-year-old, respiratory rate 0, pulse is weak, unresponsive, found underneath the desk. What's the first thing we're going to do with this child? Open the airway, doesn't start breathing. Yeah, well, here we can give them 5 rescue breaths.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. 4-year-old, respiratory rates 45, pulse is present and crying, no obvious injuries. It's right on the border, so you can give them a green. 2-year-old, respiratory rates 20, has pulses, hoarse cries, soot to the face. Again, here's another one we're looking at the injuries versus what.
Wait a minute, so to the face is yellow, but facial burns and coughing is green?
The reason why is, and this is their philosophy behind this, is that the 4-year-old can get up and walk away. The 2-year-old will not get up and walk away on its own. So that's why they say it's yellow. And then the 3-year-old, 28, respiratory rate, strong, palpable pulses, crying, second and third degree burns to the extremities. Respiratory rate. Now why is that a yellow?
I don't know, you're not supposed to look at the injuries.
True it is.
Yeah. See, respiratory rates between 15 and 20.
2-year-old can't walk.
The 3-year-old, they can't walk away, but they can roll away.
They can roll away, yeah. Yeah, probably because they won't get up and walk away on their own. That's why they tasted a yellow. All right, now, here's something. You got 5 kids that are being carried out, and CPR is being done by bystanders. What are you going to tag these kids? Are you just going to say, well, you can put them over there on the black tarp?
If you're going CPR, keep going CPR and have someone check them out.
Yeah. If someone is already doing CPR on them and they're not using the resources of the professionals, then let the bystanders continue to do CPR on them. Absolutely. That's a, you know, it can be a tough call. If for some reason the bystanders don't want to do CPR, then depending on what your resources are available to you guys, then you may have to take them as expected. But, you know, it really comes down to what resources you guys have as a department or that are available to you as a department. All right, here we're at a park. Small microburst hit a neighborhood. There's 3 children outside. They're the only 3 patients involved. Scene safe. So what size incident here? Small. Do you have to complete a patient report?
Yes.
What hospital are you going to notify here? Yeah, you're going to notify your closest hospital. And, yeah. So we have an 8-year-old male, respiratory rates 10, weak, thready pulse, unresponsive, outside, face down. What category of patient, because they actually put colors here, but it's category. We don't have enough information technically to do the categories, right? So, what color would you give this patient? Red, yeah. 3-year-old male, 18, respiratory rate, has pulses, responds appropriately to pain, deformed lower leg. Yep, yellow. How old is suck up the pain? Yes.
1927 Mormon, 48 over. Yeah, that's fine. Every 21, 23, 1927 Mormon, 48 over.
Getting there. Only been here for 45 minutes. For you, you get all 3 hours. I hate to cheat you.
Got a question?
Yeah.
Why is this, how do you differentiate between business as usual and small scale incident? I thought this would be business as usual.
For you guys, it might be business as usual. Yep. That's one thing. You've got to know your department can handle it. You might actually, to be honest with you, 3 kids, you probably maybe even have like Skokie or department around you come in and help. I would say business as usual. I wouldn't even call this a small-scale incident if it was me. But if you're a department that has 1 fire engine, 1 ambulance, no mutual aid plan, then yeah, then you may have to call it a small-scale incident. All right, 9-year-old female, 44 respiratory rate, good pulses, responds to voice, has lacerations to the head and face. Great.
What do those stand for?
Now-
Got it.
Yeah.
Red's what, immediate?
Red is what?
Immediate? What are the words? I already
Oh,
forgot.
immediate, delayed, and minor. And you know, my thought on this is, why fix something that isn't broken? I understand the whole thing with the lawsuits with the black tags and the expectant and deceased. I understand that they're trying to avoid further lawsuits. But the red, yellow, and green doesn't matter, you know. Okay. All right, so here's our tabletop exercise. This is our test for the day. So school's back in session. Yep. And they're having a pep assembly. You can figure out whatever school you want is in your area. Let's go with the high school that's over on.
Niles West.
Good. All of a sudden, your 911 dispatch starts receiving phone calls that there was an explosion in the gym area at your local high school, or let's not go high school, elementary school, or middle school, which one? There's been a collapse, the gym was full, there was an assembly going on, they heard explosion-like noises coming from that area, okay? You see numerous children running and adults running from the building. There's smoke and debris in the air and dust in the air. Northerly winds 10 miles an hour, temperature 65. Not sure how many people are injured on the scene. So, first of all, does your dispatch center, with the ability, with that dispatch information, have the ability to upgrade the call? Or do they have to wait from someone here to give them the authority to upgrade and, you know, get extra resources available? They do have the ability to do it? All right, good. And most of the time, they probably would. They're pretty good. Okay. So you're the first officer on scene. What would you do if you were the first officer on scene? What would the first officer do? What kind of resources are you going to need for this? All right. Yeah, obviously we'll need more ambulances, heavy rescue. Besides other fire departments, what other resources out there would be available to you that, I don't know if it'd be necessary like right now, but you are going to need at one point?
Canteen.
Canteen, yes.
School district.